Hi everybody, welcome to this week's live Q&A. Very excited to be here to talk about a really important topic. People, why do so many community wellbeing initiatives really fail to create the lasting change that had been hoped for? Now I'm going to talk today about 4 significant reasons why this happens, and so that we can really start making a difference. Now, the thing is, when we talk about community wellbeing initiatives, there are so many passionate people who are really frustrated with mental health and wellbeing outcomes and really want to be able to make a difference, and they're just desperate to do something. And so it's really frustrating from my point of view to see when initiatives happen that they're not as successful as people had hoped for, and the traction that they were hoping to create hasn't quite happened. All right, so let's talk about these 4 reasons. Now, they're not in any particular order. Our first reason why these initiatives don't necessarily create lasting change is that many initiatives really rely on short-term funding rather than long-term, sustainable, significant funding solutions. Now, the reason why this happens, and what I see a lot when I work with individuals and with communities, is that people have a frustration and they come up with an idea, often an amazingly great idea, and they take their idea and they look for funding to support it. And the thing is that it doesn't work. Like, it can work short term, but it doesn't work for a long-term sustainable solution. Now, there's a natural reason why this happens, because people come into this excited, they're ready to go, they've got a great idea, they want funding to support it. It's a natural pattern. But the thing is, when we instead take that idea and create some really good foundational work, we collect impactful, engaging data, not just surface level data, we actually help to bring our community along on the journey, and we create buy-in with our community. And that really changes the needle when it comes to funding, and it changes the needle when it comes to creating sustainable long-term solutions. And it allows us to open up opportunities for much bigger, more sustainable funding. So, the thing is that when we don't do this, what tends to happen is that we create a solution, we get some short-term funding, but then everything goes back at the end of that to the way it was before, when things had happened like that. Now, when, sorry, I'm just going to get myself organised. Now, the thing is that this is really important, because we don't want our ideas to be fantastic, to be great, but then there's no long-term outcomes, there's no cultural shift, and these things just disappear. These amazing ideas that we've had just disappear, and we have to start all over again. And we really want to be working instead towards creating this cultural shift in the way that we're approaching mental health and wellbeing. Okay, so our second reason, a really important reason, is that there's often a focus on individual programs being the solution rather than a whole of community approach. Now, I want to start by saying that programs are amazing. Programs are a fantastic tool, but they are one piece of the puzzle. When a community often brings in a program, it's usually to address an issue. They've identified an issue and they bring a program in to resolve that issue. But when that happens, it often comes in as a standalone solution on its own, which is often great while it's being implemented, but it disappears, and everything just goes back to the way it was when that program finishes. Now, when instead we actually take that program and we make it part of a whole of community approach, we get to consider all of the aspects of that issue, but we also get to consider all of the areas in our community that are being impacted, and all the target groups and all the people that are being impacted by this issue. And when we have a program as part of a community approach, it allows us to have a multi-pronged approach. We can look at how we can develop the language around it, the awareness that needs to be built, the support models. We can also consider the education that's happening, the involvement of sporting groups and businesses and how they're being impacted by that issue. And that really allows us to consider all of the areas being impacted, and it allows us to consider how we can create this cultural shift again, rather than just changing the behaviours and then just increasing awareness. We want to actually shift the approach to what's going on and actually change the way people are looking at doing this. And yeah, like I said, not just increase the awareness around it. All right. The third reason why this issue happens, and that is, and it's a really significant one, is that people often assume that professional or government agencies will solve the problem, but the thing is that the real change happens from the ground up, from grassroots solutions. Now, I was once asked to speak on a radio station a few years ago to give comment about some federal funding in Australia that was coming in for mental health, and it was a really fantastic thing. But at the time on the radio interview, I pointed out that now that we have the funding, it was up to us in communities and organisations to actually come up with the solutions and to utilise this money effectively. And the reason I say that is because we are the ones that live in our communities. We are the ones that are working and see the cracks, see the solutions that aren't working, and actually recognise what could potentially be done to solve the issue. Now, when we follow that up with an effective process, the government and other funding significant opportunities actually come up and open up our ability to bring our ideas to life, not the other way around. It's a really significantly different way of considering how it works, but the thing is, when you create the solutions from the ground up, really having connections across your community, knowing the issues that are there and the potential solutions and how they could work in a local environment, it really does open up significant funding, and there is funding out there to support these things if it's done effectively. All right, our last reason I want to talk to you about today, or why our community wellbeing initiatives aren't necessarily always creating lasting change, is that we tend to get stuck in siloed approaches instead of actually looking to collaborate across our communities and across our sectors. Now, the thing is, we all know that mental health does not exist on its own. We all know that mental health impacts all areas of our life. It impacts our relationships, our workplaces, our education, our physical health, etc., etc. And we also all know that all of those areas of our life impact and have an influence on our mental health. Yet we're still trying to address mental health and wellbeing issues in isolation and through siloed approaches. When we think about it, our educators, our health professionals, our police, our small businesses, our sporting groups, our community groups, they're all trying to address wellbeing in some way or another. Now, whether they're looking at prevention, whether they're looking at awareness, support, early intervention, crisis, whatever it might be, the thing is that we all have a role to play. We've all got a role to play in improving the collective approach to mental health and wellbeing. And the thing is that currently people are actually burning out in those sectors, trying to do it all. Certainly as someone who came from education and with a mum who worked in health, there's real burnout that's happening because people are trying to figure it all out and trying to address all the solutions because they truly care. But what I want you to consider is that what if instead we actually focused on the strengths that we had, rather than trying to do all of the things, focus on the strengths that we're good at. Like, for example, educators are good at educating and, all these different things. But then we collaborated in order to address shared issues that we're all facing and actually create common sense solutions, that common sense shared solutions that we could implement together without having to try to each do it all on our own. And this in turn shares the burden of responsibility. It's a really different way of thinking of how to do things, but I've witnessed this many times over. I've implemented this myself. It is just a different way to do things, and I honestly think we need to start considering this, because our siloed approaches just, well, one, they're burning people out, and they're just not always finding the mark and reaching the outcomes that we would hope for them. So look, there's been a lot in today's session, but I want you to just take the chance to reflect and think about, have you seen a wellbeing initiative? It might have been recently, it might have been quite a while ago, in your community or your local area that didn't necessarily last, that didn't have the impact ongoing that had been hoped for. And what do you think went wrong? Why did it not stick? It might have been fantastic while it was being implemented in the short term, but did it stick around for the next 10 years and ongoing? And did it change the needle and change the culture around that answer? I'd love for you to pop those in the comments, and really so that we can have a conversation and start talking about those things. And look, I want you to drop a yes in the chat right now if you want to do things better, that you just want to be part of making a difference and finding a way to create sustainable change so that collectively we can improve mental health and wellbeing outcomes, and we can really stop watching the mental health statistics and start changing them. Look, that's enough for today. I hope you've got something out of this. Until next time, I'll catch you later.